Yisrael Memamid Base 40b1 in the art scroll. So we had a machlokas of what's this of what's the source that that the person who rapes or seduces the girl has to pay boshes of pagam. Boshes is her humiliation, and pagam is her depreciation in value for no longer being a virgin. And Abai said tachas asher ina, that he has to give 50 shekel in place of or because he laid with her. So for that he laid with her, so that means that's only a payment for having laid with her. But there's other things that he's chayav, that he's obligated to her, which is her humiliation and her depreciation. And Rava Amar Kravanas Isha Shechevi Malavi Anara Chamishim Kasaf and Ashkiva Nun Mechadi Kaboshes of Gam. The man who lays with her will give to the father of the maiden 50 silvers. So the man who laid with her implies that it's only for having laid with her. But that implies that there's other things that he owes, and those are the boshes of God. The Ema, so maybe she gets to keep it, because we say it said that it goes to the father, to her father. Maybe only the money that was the 50 that the Torah explicitly says goes to the father, but maybe the humiliation and the depreciation goes to her. Amar Krabi Narabe Savia. The pasuk says when she's a nara in the house of her father. Kol Shavach Nurim Lavia. Any profit or appreciation or whatever that happens from the financial appreciation that happens when she is a nara goes to her father. Now this pasuk is written in Parshas Matos, I think. It's talking about the laws of a father or a husband annulling his wife's oaths. So the Gemara asks, so any money she gets as a nara goes to the father. So this boshes and pagam goes to her father. But so we asked a question on this. We said the source is the pasuk bina Rabbi Savia, but the question is, Rav Huna Marav says, how do we know that Maisa Bas Lavia? How do we know that what a daughter makes, whether salary, wages, etc., how do we know her father gets that? Says in Parshas Mishpatim, when a man will sell his daughter as an ama, as a servant, so just like a servant, her master keeps the fruits of her labor, what she makes. So to a daughter, whatever she makes goes to her father. So Lamali, why did he need to make that comparison between marriage and ama? Why doesn't he learn from Binu Rabbi Savia? Ela hahiba first in term who dixiv, because the reason is that Binu Rabbi Savia is written by annulling vows. If you want to learn the halacha, the monetary halacha, from the law of vows, we don't learn monetary cases from cases of iser v'heter, things of being permitted and not permitted. Let's say, is a chicken kosher or treif? That's a question of isura. And similarly, vows is a question of isura. So we don't learn monetary cases from the laws of a neder. And if you want to learn it from the knas, so the 50 shekel that the rapist or the seducer has to pay the father. So just like the father gets that, maybe the father gets the boshes and pagam also. We can't learn laws of regular restitution money from cases of knas. Remember, we saw last week and a few weeks before that according to some opinions, knas is such a novel concept. We wouldn't know that if you stole and shechted a cow, you'd have to pay back 5 times the value of the cow. The value of the cow itself, that's restitution. But the other 4 times that you have to pay, if it was worth $1,000, the cow, and now you have to pay back $5,000 because you shechted it and it's not available to be returned, you have to pay $5,000, $1,000 for the restitution, and then $4,000 in fines. So fines are so novel. We saw a few opinions of Amoraim that even if you get a death penalty, you should have to pay a fine, because there's no way that the Torah would negate would exempt you from having to pay a fine, because the whole fine is a chiddush, it's an innovation. It can't be pushed away. So we can't learn. So even if you don't agree with that opinion, but still everyone would agree, you can't learn details of a restitution payment. And this is in the Boshes Megam is a restitution for her humiliation, her embarrassment, and for her decrease in value. We can't learn that out from a knas. And the 50 shekel is a knas, is a fine. Ela mistavra. So what's the source that? So meaning he rejected meaning the first answer was Binu Rabbi Savia. So why didn't Binu Rabbi Savia? He rejected the okay, what's the thread here? I lost the thread, because it sounded like Rav Huna, no, not Rav Huna. Rav Huna Amarav said that we learned out from a comparison to Amma, and that was arguing the opinion of learning it out from Binu Rabbi Savia from vows. And then we say you can't learn it out from the 50 shekel, you can't learn it out from the vows. So rather, it's a svara, it's just a logical argument that it belongs to his father, because when she's a nara or a katana, he can marry off to whoever wants to marry her off. So someone who has a mukashchin, someone who has terrible skin ailments that no one wants to be near, he can accept kedushin from her and put her in a situation where she's always humiliated by being in contact with this mukashchin. So since he could do that to her, so he would get this money. So I guess you have to use this svara to the opinion who refuses to learn it out from Binu Rabbi Savia, even though the question and answer form of the Gemara doesn't seem to follow that, because Rav Huna Marav gives a reason. And so this answer must be according to the opinion who rejects Rav Huna Marav. Okay, 2 dots. And Mema Mebeis, about 2/5 of the way down. So what's her devaluation, her monetary devaluation? We see as if she was a slave who was sold. How much would a slave go on the market if she's a virgin? How much would she go if she's not? So the Gemara says, "Hey, how do we appraise her? How do we estimate the value?" Amar Vod Shmuel, the father of Shmuel said, "Omdim kama adam rotza litain ben shivcha besula l'shivcha beula l'shamsho." We would see how much a person is willing to pay, the premium he's willing to pay to pay for a virgin slave as opposed to a non-virgin slave to serve him. So the Gemara asks, "Shivcha beula l'shamsho," versus paying the value of a non-virgin shivcha to serve him. So the Gemara says, "My nafkal amina," but he can't be. He's a full Jew. He's not allowed to be married to a slave. So what does it matter? He's not going to pay anything because it doesn't happen. He can't use her l'shamsho. So the difference between a non-virgin slave to a virgin slave in regard to, no, it actually uses the opposite term here. For whatever reason, it switches from virgin to non-virgin. It says for a shivcha who has already been with someone to a shivcha who hasn't been. It could be that we know the halacha is, and we saw the Mishnah, that a shivcha who's more than 3 years old in one day doesn't have a din of a basula. So perhaps the Gemara changed the lashon here because of that fact. It doesn't want to call it a basula to think that anyone would make a mistake that she would have a halachic status of a basula, but she has a halachic, but she is not a baula. That could be why the Gemara changes. And then he would give her to his slave to be with. So then the Gemara says, "Well, Avdo my nafkalimina. What does it matter? What does he care to give it to this to his slave? What does it matter to the owner, the person who's going to buy her? The Eved Sheish Rabba Korsura Chemena. Because talking about a slave who does such a good job, the master wants to reward him. So as a reward, he wants to give him a virgin slave. Mishnah, middle of Mem Amid Beis. We saw this earlier in the parak. And Dav Chavtas. Any place where a girl can be sold, if she would be raped or seduced, the rapist or seducer does not pay the 50 shekel fine. And any place where there would be a fine paid if she would be raped or seduced, her father cannot sell her. And when we say sell her, it doesn't just mean as an amma. It might also mean, we'll see in the Gemara, the first 3 lines, it might also mean to accept kedushin for her. A girl under the age of 12 who's a ketana, she can be sold as an amma ivriya, but and she does not receive, or the father doesn't receive a knas if she would be raped or seduced. Nara yesh la knas ve'ein lamecher, but a nara, a girl between 12 and 12 and a half approximately, if she gets raped or seduced, he would have to pay a 50 shekel fine, and her father is not allowed to sell her. Habogeres ein lo mecher v'lo knas. And a bogeres, once she's more than 12 and a half, it's more than 6 months after she brought the signs of physical maturity, she can't be sold, and if someone would rape her or seduce her, does not pay the fine to the father. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Zu Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda is in the name of Rav. This Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir. But the Chachamim say that even a ketana who can be sold, if she gets raped or seduced, the rapist or seducer has to pay the 50 shekel fine. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, a minor girl from 1 day old until she brings 2 pubic hairs, which is the sign of physical maturity, she can be sold as a slave, and someone who would rape her or seduce her would not pay knas. From the period that she shows physical maturity until she becomes a bogeres, which is a span of 6 months. We saw on the previous daf, I think it was, or 2 daf ago. Rabbi Meir. So from the age of 12 to 12 and a half, she cannot be sold. But if she's raped or seduced, the guy has to pay 50 shekel fine. This is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Shahaya Rabbi Meir Omer, Kamakom Shishmecher and Knas. Because Rabbi Meir held whenever she can be sold, there's no knas. So this is a brisa with the brief law of our Mishnah as the reasoning, but all the details are spelled out in this brisa. And the brisa continues and tells us that there's an opinion who argues on Rabbi Meir. If she's a minor from 3 years old and 1 day until she becomes a bogeres, which is about 6 months after she goes to physical maturity, yesh la knas. There is knas. So the Gemara says knas in mecher lo. Does that mean that there's only knas, but she cannot be sold? We know there's a din of amar ivriya. The father must be able to sell her as a servant. So lo ema af knas b'makom mecher. There's even a knas from the time she's 3 years old. There is a knas, even though she could also be sold. So the Chachamim argue on Rabbi Meir. Amar Rav Chisda, my time at Rabbi Meir. Rav Chisda says, what's the reason for Rabbi Meir that if she can be sold that knas is only in a case where she cannot be sold? So it's only, according to Rabbi Meir, there's only a 6 months period where this could happen, where someone would be chayav to pay the knas. Amar Kra Velosi Elisha. To him, she will be a wife, meaning if she was raped. So the pasuk is talking about someone who could acquire herself over. She could deal with the acquisition of herself to be married, meaning a katana before she's bas mitzvah, before she's 12, before she shows any signs of physical maturity, she's not able. She's a minor, so anything that you would do, a business transaction that she would try to do doesn't take effect because you can't. A minor can't transact business, but only velocia leisha if she's capable of marrying herself off to someone because she already turned 12. Then it's a case of when these halachas of the rapist apply. So according to Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Chisda, that's Rabbi Meir's source that it only applies in the 6-month period when she's no longer a minor, but she's not a bogeres yet. Rabbanan, what's the reason of the Rabbanan? That any time that from the time that she's 3 years old until the end of her Nara period, she, even though she could be sold for a slave, there is knas. Amar Reish Lakish, Amar Kara Nara. So Reish Lakish says, it says, if you look at the pasuk is pronounced Nara, a maiden, a lass. But if you look at the way it's spelled Nun Ayin Reish. Na'ar. If you'd read it the way that it looks like it's spelled, you would read it as a young boy, a lad. But it's pronounced lass. So how come the Torah wrote it lad if it's really talking about a lass? I know I'm not using more current lingo over here. So Nara afilu katana b'mashma. So that implies she doesn't have to be so remember, there's 3 stages of a girl's halachic status in regard to age. A katana, a minor, when she's born until she's about 12 and shows signs of physical maturity. That's a katana. Then from the time she's 12 and shows signs of physical maturity for 6 months, she's a nara. So, and then after that, she's a bogeres. So there's a halachic classification of nara, but nara also just means a young girl, a maiden, a lass, whatever you want to call her. So when the Torah spells it lad and not lass, but it's talking about a lass, that means that it's a girl who is still like a little boy. She doesn't have physical signs of being a female yet, obviously, other than the genitalia signs, but there's no signs of maturity of her being a young woman yet. This could be, I think, if you look by Rivka, why does the Medrash like to say that Rivka was 3 years old when Yitzhak married her? I think it says Nara without a hey over there. So that means she had to be under 12 years old. Shema Rav Papa Breder of Hanan mi Beikluchis. Rav Papa, the son of Rav Hanan from the place called Beikluchis, heard this statement from Reish Lakish. Azal Amr Kameder of Simi Bar Ashi. So he said it over in front of Rav Simi Bar Ashi. Amar le asun aha masnisan lahu. I didn't hear it that way. Anan aha masnisan la. We heard this teaching of Reish Lakish about Nara spelled without a hey, meaning even a minor girl, from the following case. Amar Reish Lakish. Hamotzi shemra al katana pater. If someone falsely accuses a katana, he's exempt. So what's motzi shemra? Motzi shemra is if a guy got married, and then he says that his wife was not a virgin. So, and then the father will bring proof of it to Beis Din, and then the man has to pay, I think, 100 shekel, and he gets lashes. So Reish Lakish says, so this is only true if the wife was a nara. If she was a katana less than 12, if he made this claim, he doesn't have these punishments of Motzi Shemra don't apply. Because Shanamar V'Nosnu Lavi Hanara, Nara Male Diber Hakasav. Because it says that the man will have to give to the father of the Na'ara, and it's written, hey, it's written like the word last, 50 shekel. So, 100 shekel. So only when she's actually a Na'ara does this halacha take place. If she'd only be less than 12 years old and not have signs of physical maturity, this halacha wouldn't apply. If he would say that he didn't find that she wasn't a virgin, he wouldn't have to pay the 100 shekel and get lashes. So he learned Reish Lakish's idea, but in the opposite way. If it's Nara with a hay, it means only a Nara. But if it would be, the implication is if it was Nara without a hay, just Nun Ayin Reish, but pronounced Nara, it would include a Katana. Maskal Rav Ada Bar Ava asked to this, the way they taught over this statement, this teaching of Reish Lakish, so the reason that this applies to only when it's a 12 to 12 and a half year old girl is because the pasuk actually writes Nun Ayin Reish Hey in the feminine form. Halav Hachi Havamina Fil Katana. If not for that, I would have said that it includes even a minor. So the pasuk continues is that if what the man said was true, what the husband said was true, and she really wasn't a virgin, then the girl gets punished with skila. So if it wasn't talking about, if it was including talking about a 12-year-old, how would you kill a girl who was a minor? The Beis Din doesn't punish minors. The Beis Din only punishes people who are halachically adults. And a katana doesn't get punished. So it's not that we learned from here that Nara is a girl who is already above the age of bas mitzvah, but the teaching from Reish Lakish had to be the opposite. That if it says na'ara but spelled nun ayin reish, it must be talking about even a katana, and then this the way the pasuk spells the word by the Motzi Shemra fits in with Reish Lakish's teaching. So if Reish Lakish's teaching was only about nun ayin reish, that's pronounced nara. Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, the Mishnah. If someone says, I seduced so-and-so's daughter, he has to pay for her humiliation and her depreciation because of his admission, but he does not pay knas. He does not pay the 50 shekel fine. So the Mishnah is going to say, and the Gemara, the Mishnah, the last line of the Mishnah, we'll skip ahead, just so we know, Zeh HaKlal, this is the general rule. Kol HaMishalim Yeser Amasha Hizik, anyone who pays more than the actual amount of what he damaged does not pay from his own admission, because anything that you have to pay for what the damage was, that's restitution. Restitution is you're making someone whole. Any amount of money that you have to pay above that is a fine. And so there's a halachic principle. The Gemara in Bava Kama learns it from, Rashi brings Bava Kama Daf Ayin Hey learns it from in the following word: Modeh knas pater. If you admit to a case of knas, you're exempt, because the pasuk in Mishpatim says Asher Yarshiyun Elohim, because the Beis Din, Elohim in this case doesn't mean God; it means the Beis Din finds you guilty. Prat l'marshiyas atzmo. You only pay these payments when the Beis Din finds you guilty. But if you admitted your own guilt, you pled guilty yourself without the Beis Din finding you guilty, then you do not pay knas. So back to the Mishnah, this third line. If someone says, I stole something, you pay back the principal, you make restitution for what you stole, but you do not pay double or 4 or 5 times if you had, let's say, shechted it and stole it, that you would have to pay the restitution. If you said my axe killed a person or my axe killed someone else's axe, you have to pay from your own admission, because to pay the amount of money you pay in those cases are straight up restitution for the loss of life that it caused. But but if you said my axe killed so-and-so's slave, then you don't pay. Because when your axe kills a slave, you do not pay restitution. You pay 30 shekel flat fee. It doesn't matter. The Gemara is going to discuss. Doesn't matter if the slave was a very skilled worker who did very valuable work, or he was a very unskilled worker who did very not valuable work. You pay a flat fee of 30 shekels. So since it's a flat fee, it's not restitution. So that's considered a knas. So therefore, if you would admit that your animal killed someone's eved, because the only amount of money that you pay as a knas, you would be exempt from paying knas. Zah klal, again, we read this before, but here's where it says in the Mishnah, this is a general rule, call hamashalim yeser amasha hizik, ein hamashalim alpi atzma. Whoever pays more than what he actually damaged, he does not pay from his own admission. So the Gemara asks, Velisni anasti. So why does the Gemara only say, Ha'omer pititi espito shaploni? If I seduced so-and-so's daughter. What if he says, I raped so-and-so's daughter? Would he not pay the Boshas and Pagam in that case? So the Gemara says, Lomi Bai Kamer. He's saying a case of Lomi Bai. I don't need to tell you this case, but even in the other case, he'd also be exempt. Not exempt. He'd also be obligated to pay Boshas of Pagam. Lomi Bai Anasti Lo Kapagim Le Divishalim Boshas of Pagam Al Piatzmo. The Mishnah doesn't need to tell us that if he says, I raped so-and-so, so it's not such a great humiliation to her for being raped. Now, the logic might sound a little strange, but here's what the Gemara is coming from. If she was raped, she didn't do anything to bring the rape upon herself. But he would have to pay the pagam. Oh, I'll be right back. Okay, so if she was raped, she didn't do anything to bring it upon herself, so she didn't do anything that's humiliating to her family. So in that case, she didn't do anything to bring humiliation to her family. So the man would have to pay Boshas of Gam. But if he said, I seduced her, that's extra humiliating to her because he's saying that she went along with this irregular behavior. I might think that he's not believed from his admission to have to pay this bigger amount of money. So it may not just be her personal pagam, excuse me. So it's just interesting. There's boshas, which is for humiliation. There's pagam for her devaluation. But an injury, whether it's emotional or whatever, has the word pagim, which is the same word as pagam. So it's just interesting that the word tigloka pagim le mishalim boshas, when he says, when I raped her, he's not damaging her reputation. He has to pay boshas. And pagam avopititi de kapagim le, but if he says I seduced her, he is really making her credibility take a big hit, not her credibility, but her reputation take a big hit. Rashi says the rumors that go about a rape is not as great as the rumors that go around about a seducer. V'kevan delav pagam dila, and since it's not her pagam, he wouldn't be believed that he would have to pay the boshas and pagam from his thing. So pagam dila, the way Rashi is saying it, it seems that, and we'll see from a few more lines in the Gemara, it's not just humiliation to her personally, because obviously if she allowed herself to be seduced, she was to some extent a participant, but it makes her whole family look bad. So it maybe that's what Rashi means. I don't think it fits in so well to Gemara, but we'll definitely see that it's bad for her whole family. Kamash Malan, that even if he says pititi, that it's causing a much greater amount of busha, of humiliation, and the payment for the humiliation, he may not have to pay. So the Mishnah is telling us the bigger chiddush, that even if he seduced her, he has to pay boshas and pagam from his own admission. So our Mishnah didn't have any names in it, so we don't exactly right now know who the author of our Mishnah is, but we know who the author of the Mishnah isn't. Our Mishnah is not like the following Tanya. Tana. The Tana we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon Af Boshes Uvgam Einu Masham Al Piatzma. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Shimon that he, just like he doesn't pay the knas, the 50 shekel fine from his own admission, he also doesn't pay Boshes Uvgam. Lo call himeno sheyivkom bito shaploni, because we don't always believe him to the extent that we let him impugn certain young women of the community. Amar le Rav Papa Abaye, Rav Papa said to Abaye, Nichala ledida mai. What if she says, I'm okay with this getting out? Yes, it's true. So if she doesn't mind, according to this opinion, that to this opinion that we don't let him to impugn her, but if she agrees to it and says, yeah, it's true, and Rashi points out that she's willing to take the hit to her reputation because she's going to get paid for it. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, no, we still wouldn't, according to this Rabbi Shimon and Yehuda, we wouldn't pay because even if her she's willing to take the hit, her father doesn't want to take the hit. If the father's willing to take the hit also, the reputation hit in place of the money, would he be allowed to pay? Because maybe the whole family wouldn't be okay with it. And if the whole family says that they're okay with it, what's halacha? So it's not possible that there's not a distant relative somewhere, or even on the other side of the world, who would be okay with it. So because there's no way for us to know for sure that the whole family is okay with it, we would still not let him pay according to that opinion. And I assume the halacha is, well, I shouldn't say that. In money, we don't follow the rove. So even in this case where we would think that that most of the family would be okay, if most of the family writes, they sign consent forms, and we're okay with this admission, we believe it, and we'll accept the restitution. But there might be, there's probably someone from another side of another person from the family, but he's on the other side of the world, who wouldn't be okay with that. So because of that, we don't sign it. That's one way of learning it. A slightly different way of learning it is, true, maybe this whole family is okay with it, but there are some families who wouldn't be okay with it. So because it's not okay for all families, we won't let this family receive the money either. Here at the two dots, about halfway down the page. The first word of the line is Ha'omer Ganafti Mishamas HaKaren. So this is, if you say I stole, you have to pay the principal. So there's a very, very important machlokas here, a famous machlokas. It's also in Bava Kama, but it's in our Gemara also. Itmar Palganiska. We are taught what is half damage. So there's a halacha that if your ox had never gored before and it gored, so goring is unusual behavior in an animal. So the first few times that the animal does it, you only pay half of the value of the damage that it caused. But however, once it's habituated to goring, that we know that it's gored 3 times already, then you have to pay the full damage of restitution for the full damage of what it caused. But this would be in distinction to, let's say, an animal was walking and it broke something as it walked. Now, walking is a normal behavior in an animal. So any animal, if it breaks something while it's walking, it would have to pay full value. But goring, damaging by goring is unusual. So until it's habituated by doing 3 times, you only pay half. So we know that when you pay the value of the Mishnah said that when you pay the value of the damage, that's restitution. If you pay more, that's knas. But what about this halacha of chatzi nezek, when you're only paying half the damage? When we say that you pay more than the damage is knas, does that mean literally you have to pay more than the damage? Or does paying more than the damage means any amount other than the exact amount of restitution? So it could be when you're paying double or quadruple or quintuple, or it could also be when you're paying chatzi nezek, only half damages. So what's the halacha? Is chatzi nezek knas or is it mamon? Is it considered mamon, just regular restitution, but the Torah only makes you pay half, or is it a knas? And the Gemara will explain the logic. So I'll just wait. I'm not explaining it fully because the Gemara is going to explain it in a minute. Rav Papa Amar Paga Niska Mamona. Rav Papa said that half damage is mamon. It's restitution. Rav Hona Breder Rav Yeshua Amar Paga Niska Knasa. Rav Hona Breder Rav Yeshua says that half nezik is a fine. It's a knas. So what? So the nafkamina, and this is the way we passing that it's knas. But the nafkamina is, what if you come before anyone takes you to court and you said, my animal gored that window of that shop and shattered the glass? If it's knas, you'd be exempt. If it's mamon, if it's restitution, you would still have to pay even if you admitted it. So Rav Papa Amar Pagan is Mamona Kasavar Stam Shavarim Labaches Kashimar Kaimi. Rav Papa holds that the half damage is considered regular restitution because a regular axe is not considered guarded, meaning if you have an axe that is habituated to goring, you know that you have to watch it. If you have an axe that has not habituated itself to goring, it hasn't gored at all, or it hasn't gored 3 times yet, do we consider it an accident waiting to happen that you need to watch it? Or is it considered, since it's not habituated, we don't have to worry that it's going to gore, and we don't have to take any special precautions guarding it? So he holds that a regular ox, it's not considered safe. We consider it, the Gemara didn't say, but I'm saying it's not considered safe, it's considered an accident waiting to happen. So since it's considered an accident waiting to happen, you should pay more attention to it and keep a closer eye on it to make sure that it doesn't damage. So really, you should have to pay the entire damage that it would cause. But the pasuk, the Torah, Hashem has mercy on you, and says since it hasn't been habituated yet, that it hasn't gored 3 times, you don't have to pay the full value of the damage. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua Amar Paganitzka Knasa. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua says that it's a knas, it's a fine. Kesuvos Stam Shvarim B'Cheska Shimur Kaimi. A regular axe, because it hasn't gored before, or it hasn't become habituated to gore, we consider it as if it's not going to gore. It's considered if it's watched. Uvidinhu Delola Shalim Klal. So therefore, if it damaged, you should be completely exempt because it's such an unanticipated event. You shouldn't have to pay it all. But the Torah said you have to pay something in order to induce you to keep an eye on your ox. Simin Hezek Ma Vehemis Klal. So that's the machlokas. Now we're going to learn a few other related cases. And we learned in the Mishnah about Bakama and in Bechoros, I think it is. Where is it? Babakama Hanizik Bamazik Betashlumin. The victim and the damager are to an extent partners in restitution. So that means if Reuven's ox damaged Shimon, obviously Reuven has to pay Shimon back, but Shimon to some extent takes some type of loss also. So the question is, what's the loss that he takes? We understand, according to the opinion, that paying half of the damage is considered restitution. Didn't make sense that you're including the victim as restitution because the Torah requires the damager to only pay half. So the victim, foregoing half, he's a participant in the restitution, in the fact that he is not, I mean, the Torah is, but he is foregoing half his payment. But according to the opinion that Chatzi Nezek is a fine, so anything that's a fine, by definition, is something that is not restitution. So any amount that he receives is not in the form of restitution. So if he's not getting any restitution, the payment that he's getting is as a fine, not as a restitution. So then how is he a partner to this in this repayment. So the Gemara answers lo nitzcha el apiches nevela. So the halacha is that the carcass of the, let's say that Reuven's shore killed Shimon's ox or Shimon's animal. So Reuven is going to have to pay Shimon for half the value of the shore because it was done in a case where it wasn't a muad and it's chati nazek. But what about the carcass? Because Reuven's animal killed it and he's paying, does he get to get the carcass, or does Shimon, who was his animal, does he keep the carcass? So the halacha is Shimon, the guy who owned the animal, keeps the carcass. However, when you had a fresh carcass, it was worth more than a few days old decaying carcass. So by the time he'd go, the Beis Din would meet and talk about the case, the value of the carcass has gone down. So when the Reuven's paying half the amount of the damage, but it's only as a knas, as a fine, Shimon is participating in the restitution in the fact that he's losing part of the value of the carcass because he has to wait till Beis Din makes its decision, so he can't sell a fresh carcass, or maybe if it's fresh, you could do, make leather out of it, and after it's a few days old, it's not good to make leather out of it anymore or whatever. So that's how he's participating in his own repayment. The Gemara asks, Piches Nevela, you're talking about that the fact that the carcass is now worth less, Tanina, but we learned in that same Mishnah, Tashlume Nezek, when the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Bava Kama says that when you pay restitution for damage, it tells us that the owner gets to keep the carcass. So we already know the Gemara gets that the victim keeps the carcass. So the Mishnah here, by saying that the damager and the victim participate in the repayment, it can't be talking about the carcass because we already know that he keeps the carcass. So the Gemara says, no, it's still, we need it to teach us, even though we had the first Mishnah. We need one Mishnah to teach us that a tam, an unhabituated ox that gores and kills another ox, the owner of the dead animal keeps the animal. And we need a new case in a habituated ox that gored and killed an animal, that the owner of that dead ox gets to keep his animal. Why do I need both? If the Mishnah only taught it in regard to an unhabituated ox killing, I would say mishum dakati lo iyaid, because this animal had not become habituated to goring. So the owner gets to keep the carcass of a muad, the iyaid aim low. But for a muad, a habituated animal, I would say that if this animal was already habituated to harming, I might think that in that case, the Reuven, the ones whose ox damage, should have to pay for the depreciation of the carcass also, because he already has more responsibility because he has to pay full damages instead of half damages. He should also have to pay for the depreciation of the carcass. And if the Mishnah only told us that the muad, the habituated ox that gored and killed another ox, that owner, that in that case the victim loses the depreciation of the carcass, that's because he's at least getting restitution. He's receiving restitution for the damage of his whole live cow. So he got payment for the live cow, so he could take a little bit of a loss on the remains of the dead carcass. Of tam aim low. But if it was a tam, since he's not getting restitution, I might think that part of the compensation package he should have for his animal being killed would include the depreciation value in the carcass from the time that it was freshly killed until the time that Beis Din rules a few days later. Shricha, therefore, we need our Mishnah, the first Mishnah, we need this Mishnah to teach us that both cases, the owner of the dead animal takes the loss on the depreciation of the value of the carcass. Tashma. We learned in a brisa, ma tam or in a mission in a ma bein tam lamud. What's the difference between an unhabituated axe and a habituated? Shatam misham chatzin nezik migufa. So an unhabituated animal that gored and killed another thing or damaged, he pays half damage from his own value. But let's say that he gored a Rolls Royce, so he caused $50,000 in damage, but the animal itself is worth $1,000. So the damage was $50,000. Chatzi nezek, the half the damage is $25,000, but its own value is only worth $1,000, so it can't cause more damage than its own value, meaning cause the damage, but the amount of insurance, quote unquote, the amount that the owner has to compensate cannot exceed the value of the axe itself. But an habituated animal that has gored several times and complete, he has to pay for full damage even if it's beyond the value of the animal itself. So that's what the Mishnah says is different between tam and mud. According to Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua, that chatzin is a knas, there's another very big difference between tam and mud. If you would admit for a tam and chatzin nezek is knas, you would be exempt. And for muad, it's restitution. So even if you admit, you'd be chayav. So there's a big difference between tam and muad. So from the fact that Mishnah doesn't list that if you would admit to the damage, you would be exempt. So it must be that chatzin nezek is mama. It's restitution. It's not knas. As the Gemara said, ton of a shayir. So it's true he should have mentioned it, but there are other things that he mentioned out. He didn't list. It wasn't an exhaustive list of all the differences between tam and muad. My shire, the high shire. So what else did the Mishnah leave off? That this isn't the only thing that he left off. You could prove to me that he left off other things as well. Shire chatzi kofer. He left off the case of chatzi kofer. So if an animal killed a person, you pay a payment called kofer. And if a tam killed the person, you only have to pay half of kofer. And Rashi said that Gemara talks about that in Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis in Bava Kama. So just like it left off that case, it left off this case, his din of that half kofer is only that half damage is only a knas, not restitution. But the Gemara says imishum chatzi kofer. If you're saying that the Mishnah left off chatzi kofer, lav shiurahu, he didn't leave it out. Hamani, because who could be the tan of this Mishnah? Rabbi Yosei Glili, it could be Rabbi Yosei Glili, Damar Tam Shalem, chatzi kofer. Rabbi Yosei Glili holds that a tam does pay chatzi kofer. And maybe that Mishnah isn't Rabbi Yosei Glili, so that Tana doesn't believe in the thing of half kofer, so he didn't leave anything else out. Tashma, let's try to prove from our Mishnah. Homish Shorias Ploni, my axe killed a person. O Shorish Ploni, or my axe killed Shmerel's axe. Raise him Hashem al piatzmo. He does pay for his own admission. My love, betam. Can't we say that our Mishnah was talking about it was a tam, an unhabituated animal, and when you admit to your animal damaging the other thing, you have to pay, and that would only work if it's chatzi nezek mama. Because if it's knas, you wouldn't pay on your own admission. So this should be a proof that chatzi nezek is not a knas. So the Gemara says, lo, b'muad. Our Mishnah in Kesuvos here is talking about a habituated animal. So therefore, according to everyone, it's restitution, and you always pay restitution from your own admission. But what would be the halacha if your animal was a tam and you admitted it? You would not pay. So meaning it's a knas. Adatani Seva, however, the last part of the Mishnah says, Abdul Shaploni Einu Mishalim Al Piatmo. If you killed someone's axe, you don't pay someone's slave, you don't pay from your own admission. Niflok V'nisne B'dida. You should list it in the same clause of the Mishnah. because the 30, when your ox kills someone else's slave, that payment is definitely knas. But when it's Avdo Shaploni, you don't pay. It should say, it should niflik, it should split it up and list it in its own clause. I said it backwards. I said it should combine the clauses. No, it should say it as a separate clause, because b'madvar memorim b'muad. When was the first halacha said that you don't pay with your own emissions if it's a muad? But an unhabituated, the first 2 times that it gored, before we know that it had a habit to gore, you wouldn't pay because it's knas. So where it says kula b'muad kamairi, the whole mission talks about muad. It's not talking about tam at all. So we'll leave it here. About 9 or 10 lines down from the bottom of the Alphabet base. We're a few lines above ending the parak. So we'll, God willing, finish the parak next week. Hashem should guard us.